الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we are only a few weeks out of Ramadan. And so, inshallah, for the next 2 Mondays, we will be discussing aspects related to Ramadan. For today in particular, we are discussing the technical aspects of our fasting in Ramadan. So there's 2 broad ways that we can divide our discussion. We have the spiritual aspects, the purposes of why we fast, the objectives, the aims, and those come under a study of the spiritual effects of it. So we talk about taqwa, we talk about why was fast given to us, what are the virtues, what are the blessings, how does it help us, how do we perfect our fast from a spiritual angle. So that's next week. But this week we're discussing the fiqh, the external, the technical. And both things they go hand in hand. So if someone ignores the external, the fiqh, then they won't really know how to fast, and if their fast was valid or not. And if someone ignores the spiritual, technically their fast will be accepted, but the point of the fast is missed out. So both aspects are very important. We'll try to keep it short and brief so that we can stay focused, inshallah ta'ala. So the first thing is to understand the definition of something. If we understand the definition of something, then we've understood pretty much a good amount of the concept. So Sawm in the Arabic language, lughatan as they say, in the sense that from a linguistic point of view, it means to abstain, to stay away from something. Okay? Now, it could be anything that you're staying away from. And that's why in the Quran, when Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about Maryam alayhi salam, and He says that she said, "Inni nadhartu lirrahmani sawman falan ukallima al-yawma insiya," that I have vowed a sawm, a fast, to the Rahman, to the Most Merciful, and so I won't speak to anyone. And so her fasting, along with eating at that time, also had an element of staying silent, not talking to people. So both things were there in that sense, but the key theme being staying away from something. So that's the linguistic definition. Technically, when we say we mean to fast, we mean to abstain from 2 things primarily. 1, eating and drinking, and 2, from intercourse, whether that's halal through marriage or haram otherwise. And so these 2 things are essentially what we are abstaining from. That's why fasting, Sawm, is not an act. It's actually refraining from an act. It's different than other ibadat. And that's why we'll discuss next week why the reward for fasting is so much. One of the reasons why is because there's a constant refraining from an act. Whereas your salah is for 5 or 10 minutes and then your salah finishes. But your Sawm, your fasting, you're constantly refraining from something throughout the day. So it's not an act, it's refraining from an act. So you abstain from eating and drinking and lawful or unlawful intercourse from true dawn to sunset. So we know what we are fasting from, and then when are we fasting? From true dawn to sunset. What do we mean by true dawn? True dawn essentially translates to the time of Fajr. And the astronomers, from their perspective, there's multiple types of dawn. There you have the astronomical dawn, you have the nautical dawn, you have the civil dawn. But to make things simple, in accordance to the Sharia, what the Sharia says is the dawn, the true dawn, is when a vertical light comes on the horizon. It's very easy to see. When that initial vertical light hits the horizon, then that is the time of Fajr Salah. That is the time of Fajr Salah. That is the time of Fajr Salah. Now, if a person eats after that moment that Fajr time has come in, then a person breaks their fast. And if a person prays their Fajr Salah before that time, their Fajr Salah is not accepted. You have to wait after that time kicks in, and then you pray your Fajr. But your fasting, it starts from right before it. So until the time of Fajr doesn't come in, you have the leeway to eat, to drink, to be intimate with your spouse. All of that is open for you until the time of Fajr kicks in. Then everything stops at that moment. So that is the definition of fasting. Now, what are the types of fasts? This is also important to know, because not every fasting is fard, and not every fasting is sunnah. There are different layers and different types of fast that we say. So we say the first type of fast, that one that we're concerned with, is the fast of Ramadan. This is fard, it's obligatory. There's no way out of it except for someone who has an excuse, as we'll come to. And there are, whether it is your ada, meaning whether it's your fasting in the month itself on time, or if you've missed your fasts with an excuse, for example, then making up that fast is also fard. And similarly, fasts that are vowed, that are mandhur. So the concept of nadhr, in the sense that when you promise to Allah that, Allah, if such and such thing happens, I will fast X amount of days, then that also becomes fard. And a person shouldn't do that. The Prophet ﷺ discouraged us from doing that. But if a person does go ahead and say, people are emotional, and they go ahead and say that if this happens, I'll fast X amount of days, then that becomes binding. Okay? So those are the fard acts. Then you move into the sunnah. So from the sunnah fast, you have the fasting of the day of Ashura, and a day before it or a day after it. The day of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram. And that's because of the Prophet ﷺ emphasizing that fast. Also the day of Arafah, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, for the person who is not making Hajj, is also considered sunnah. Number 3, you have the recommended the mandub fast. These are fasts that the Prophet ﷺ, he did not regularly do, or he did not emphasize to that point. Okay? And under them come the fasting of the 3 days of each month. So these fasts are rewarded, they're encouraged, but they're not sunnah in the way that the fasts of the previous category are. So these are the fasts of the 3 days of each month, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th. Similarly, the fasts of Mondays and Thursdays, the fasting of the 6 days of Shawwal, and similarly the fasting of what the Prophet ﷺ called the Sawm of Dawood, or fasting one day and leaving one day, if a person really has the ability to go ahead and get to that level. And then number 4 are voluntary fasts. These are nafil fasts. They can be at any time of the year. A person can decide, just for the sake of Allah, to fast. This is how we pray our nafil prayer, but with the condition that it can't be on a day that it's discouraged or it's haram to fast on. What are the days that it's discouraged or haram to fast on? These we also need to know. The 2 days of Eid, as well as the days of Tashriq. So the day of Eid al-Adha, which is the 10th, and then the 11th, 12th, and 13th of Dhul Hijjah. These 4 days in totality, consecutively, we don't fast, and it's impermissible to fast actually. And then as well as the day of Eid al-Fitr as well. So these are impermissible ones, not allowed to fast on them, and one would be committing a sin actually if they fast on this day. The reason being that the Prophet ﷺ said that they were the Eid of the Muslims. They're supposed to be days of eating and drinking and enjoying, and so when Allah says for you to enjoy, then you use that time to enjoy, and when you're asked to fast, then you fast. The last category are those that are disliked, makruh, meaning these should be avoided generally, and unless someone has a legitimate reason to do them. So one of them is, for example, singling out the day of Saturday or the day of Friday. The day of Saturday, meaning in the sense that if one wishes to resemble the Christians, for example, by considering the day of Saturday to be intrinsically special, or the day of Friday because Friday is also a Eid, it's the Eid of the week. And so if a person thinks that maybe I'll fast Friday, I'll get more reward, the Prophet ﷺ, he discouraged fasting on Friday. Similarly, any other religious festival for any other religion, so as to not associate with their religious aspect. But the exception to all of these is that unless it happens upon your habit, meaning if you're fasting some days anyways, and then a Saturday comes, or a Friday comes, or it's another people's religious holiday, then you can go ahead and continue your fast because you are not fasting for that reason, you're fasting out of your habit. The next thing is that who has to fast in Ramadan? So there's three conditions we can say, primarily, that in order for you to even be asked to fast, and in order for you, there are two more, but those are, if you miss them, you still have to make them up. But these three do not even have to make up their fast, even if they miss them. Number one is a Muslim. So if you are a Muslim, you have to fast. So if you're a non-Muslim, you're not required to fast. Now, you have a bigger problem if you're a non-Muslim because you've denied Allah, or you're not in the fold of Islam, and so that's a bigger sin. But actual fasting, you are not asked to do. And so if someone becomes a Muslim, and they haven't fasted, they're 40 or 50 or 60, so they don't have to make up all of those years. And that's why the Prophet said, Al-Islamu yajubu ma kana qablahu, that Islam wipes out everything. So if you become a Muslim, then there's no fast that you have to make up. So number one, you have to be Muslim. Number two is an adult. And the adult in the Sharia is a person who's reached the age of bulugh. They have seen or experienced certain physical signs, and now at this point they are considered to be mature or an adult. So in other words, children who haven't reached that adulthood are not required to fast. If they do fast, they should be encouraged to fast and they should be rewarded, and it's something very good for their development. But if they're not able to fast, if they struggle with it for some other reason they don't, it's not like they have to make up for it. They're not held responsible for it. But once they are adults, they do have to fast. Number three is that you have to be mentally sound and in your senses. So if a person is, for example, they're struggling with a mental illness to the point that they're unable to comprehend things around them, they need the assistance of someone, or a person is unconscious, so they're not in their senses, they don't really know what's going on around them, then in all of these conditions, a person is not required to fast. The next two are requirements in order for you to be obligated to fast at that moment. But if you fall under category 4 or 5, you still have to make it up later on. And that is the fact that you have to be healthy. So if you are sick and you are in an illness that is not chronic or permanent, it's not a terminal illness, it's a temporary illness, then you have to make up that fast when you are better, when your physician says that you are now able to fast in that sense. And the second is a resident. And so if you're a traveler, you're not required to fast. The scholars differ, is it better for you to fast or not to fast? In either case, they agree that if you do fast while you're traveling, it's accepted. And it is preferred to fast because it becomes difficult to make up your fast later on, and then people just disregard it. So if traveling is easy, it's a light travel, it's a flight that's relatively easy, short distance, go ahead and fast. If it's a very long journey, or if you're not able to, then you can go ahead and you have that leeway, but you have to make up that fast later on. Similarly, a woman who has to be free from her menstruation or from her postnatal bleeding, if she's not, then she's not required to fast, and she should not fast, and then after Ramadan, she should make up those fasts. If you've missed your fast for Ramadan due to sickness or due to travel or due to any of those things, it's highly, highly encouraged that you don't fast any sunnah fast. You leave the fast of Shawwal if you need to. You leave the Mondays and Thursdays. You first do your qada if you know that you won't be able to make it up. If you know that, okay, maybe I can do my 6 of Shawwal, and then after that I can follow up with my qada, with my fast that I missed, then that's fine. But generally speaking, you should give precedence to the days that you missed. And then if the next year has come already, the next Ramadan has come, like our Ramadan is only a few days away, and a person hasn't made up their fast, then they should fast that Ramadan normally, and right after that Ramadan, they should fast those they should fast those fasts that they missed. Okay. What about intention? Okay. One of the only condition other than these 5 that we now know is the intention itself. So if a person does not eat or does not drink for the whole day from Fajr till Maghrib, and then it's Maghrib time, and they say, well, you know what, I didn't eat anyways, so I'll just consider myself that I'm fasting. With the agreement of all Muslim scholars, your fast is not accepted. Because for ibadat, for acts of worship, there has to be a niyyah, there has to be an intention. In order for you to differentiate between that and a normal act. Otherwise, there would be no difference and it would be a whole chaos. So you have to have an intention, okay? Now, what actually counts as an intention? Do you have to verbally say something and then it becomes your intention? So the answer is no. You don't have to verbally say your niyyah. The niyyah, the place of it is in the heart. But you have to know. You have to know by the time that it is, by the morning, you have to know that it's, I'm fasting and this is for Ramadan. And if it's the fast of Ramadan, then specifically, you don't have to make an intention for every night, because generally you have it in your head and you know that I'm fasting throughout all 29 or 30 days. But you still have to have it in your heart. You have to be aware. And there has to be something to show for it. So maybe an alarm that you have. Maybe your suhoor you have prepared. Something to show that you really intended on fasting. And it's preferred to have your fast, it's preferred to have your intention at least in some portion of the night before your Fajr time comes in. Okay. Now, the Sunnahs of Fasting, okay? The Sunnahs of Fasting primarily are 2 out of the many other acts that are encouraged, but they come under the spiritual, and we'll cover them next week. The 2 related to the fiqh are your suhoor and your iftar. In particular, the suhoor, the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged it for a number of reasons. One being that it strengthens you for the meal that's going to that meal will carry you throughout your day. So you're encouraged to take that strength. And secondly, because the Prophet said that people from other religions, they don't do their suhoor. So be different and keep your suhoor. And so your suhoor should be actually delayed as much as possible, unless you fear that reasonably the time for Fajr is too close, then you should stop eating at that time. Similarly with your iftar, the sunnah in iftar is that you have your iftar as early as possible. So you shouldn't delay your iftar. As soon as the Maghrib time enters, immediately you should have your iftar. You can have something light and then pray your salah and then finish up your iftar. The particular du'as for iftar, etc., we'll discuss that in our next Monday, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, what about those things that require a makeup, meaning they invalidate the fast? This is very important, because knowing what to fast is easy. We said you stay away from eating, drinking, and intercourse, and that's it. Your fast is there from Fajr till Maghrib. But what is it that you do throughout the day that can invalidate your fast? So we can divide into 3 rough categories. The first that we say is if you do something to break your fast, and it requires both a qada and a kafara. So qada meaning you have to make up that day. Kafara meaning that you have to fast 60 consecutive days as a punishment, you can say. But this is very, very specific to one form of, or one act that a person commits. And that is intentionally eating, drinking, or engaging in intercourse, intentionally. So if a person knowingly, they're in their senses, they know this is going to break their fast, and then they intentionally take that sip of water or they eat that food, then in that case, they have to not only make up that fast, but 60 days also. The reason being that this person disregarded the sanctity of the month of Ramadan. And they didn't have an excuse. It's not that they weren't feeling well, or it's not that they did it out of forgetfulness. as we'll come to, it's not that they did it out of forgetfulness. There's no valid reason. Just simply for the sake of breaking their fast, they broke their fast. You have to fast that day as well as 60 days consecutive as well. There are certain things that if you do, then they only require a makeup fast. They only require a qada, and there's no kafara for them, right? An example is accidentally swallowing something. So there's a difference between accidentally eating something or swallowing something or forgetfully swallowing something. Forgetfully is that you forgot you were fasting. You forgot it was Ramadan, you had a sip of water, you forgot, the fact that you're fasting was not in your head. This person, your fast is completely fine. And the Prophet said that if this does happen to someone, then Allah has fed and given this person the ability to feed or drink. And so there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. But mistakenly is when you know you're fasting and then you put water in your mouth and you were gargling with it. And you knew you were fasting and you were trying to keep it out of your throat, but then the water ended up going down your throat. And so in this case, you knew you were fasting, but then it went in, but you did not intentionally do it. So that's why there's no penalty, there's no kafara, there's just the qada. You just have to make up that one day. Okay. Next is the exemption. So who are people that are, these are also people that will only be doing the qada. They'll only be making up the individual fast missed. There's no kafara, there's no penalty for them. Of those are the travelers, for example, right? We covered the travelers, the sick people, and similarly for women that are pregnant and nursing their children, then in that case, if in their specific case, their physician advises them, their physician is someone who's aware of fasting, and they come from that background where they know the value of fasting and they know the ability for a person to fast, and they still say that you won't be able to fast or it'll harm you or it'll harm your child, then in that case, you are not required to fast, and you make up for it whenever it is possible. Okay, what about if you can't fast and you won't be able to make it up either because you are too old and your physician says that you don't have the ability to fast? It'll be way too difficult for you. You yourself experience it, or you have a terminal illness, or you have a chronic illness. You have to take certain medications at certain points of the day, or any of that. The best attempt at understanding that being that you spoke with your physician and you know your body better, you know that at this point I can't fast, then this person is required simply to give a fidyah. And a fidyah is an expiation payment out of the mercy of Allah. If a person's not able and they're in one of these three categories, so they're either old enough and they won't be able to recover from their old age, or they have a terminal illness or a chronic illness and it's not hoped that they'll get better from it, then this person has to simply pay their fidyah. Their fidyah, it makes up for each fast. How much is the fidyah amount? It's approximately 2.2 kilograms of wheat, half a sa' in that time, the Prophet's time. The sa' was the measurement for doing so. So what a half a sa' would be, it's about 2.2 to, some scholars say 2, some say 2.2. There's a small variation in the amount. You would take that amount of wheat, you can gift it to any person who is deserving of zakah. The same people that are deserving of zakah, you give it to them. You can give them the cash amount equal to that as well. You would calculate that based off of whatever your local rate is. You can go to wherever you buy, see how much would it cost to buy X amount, and then you can do the conversion there. $7 or $8 or $9, $10, depending on obviously where you buy it. It can fluctuate based off of the brand, based off of a number of factors. And so $8 is a good recommended amount, and it's something that should be paid off as much as possible. If a person is unable to pay that as well, even if it's $7 or $8 a fast, and they don't even have the money to give that, then they simply ask Allah to forgive them, and they're not liable if they are not financially able to pay for that. Last two things. The disliked acts, things that are not encouraged. They're discouraged while we are fasting. Of them is chewing things unnecessarily. It's not a good habit. It doesn't, perhaps a person's constantly thinking of food, or they're trying to think of eating, and it's just something that's discouraged because we're supposed to be disengaged from eating or anything that resembles eating. Number two is excessively gargling water in our mouths. So if you're doing wudu, you shouldn't excessively gargle until you are fearing that water goes down your throat. And number three is fighting or cursing. We'll cover that next week. Things that we're not supposed to be doing anyways, they have a bigger amount of sin for us in the month of Ramadan in particular. And lastly is any excessive physical activity that would cause us to possibly break our fast, or we would not be able to hold it in. Last thing to cover, inshallah, is that things that do not break the fast, but are commonly thought to break the fast. Okay, and so we'll divide them in a few different categories. The first being bodily functions. So vomiting does not break your fast. Swallowing your saliva does not break your fast. A nocturnal emission, meaning a wet dream, does not break your fast. These are bodily functions, and none of that breaks your fast. Secondly is accidentally eating things that are not normally eaten. So for example, you were going and a small bug or a fly or some dust, it hit your mouth, you felt it go inside your mouth. That does not count as something that breaks your fast. Forgetfully eating or drinking, we mentioned that already. If you forgetfully eat or drink, then that does not break your fast either. Hygiene as well, showering, whether it's a shar'i ghusl, meaning you needed to take a ghusl, or just if you want to shower to cool down, if you want to do wudu just to cool down, or your miswak, even if your miswak is wet, none of that, it breaks your fast. And similarly, any medicinal injections that you take, such as an IV, such as insulin, such as a vaccine, other types of things that do not enter from a point of entry, namely your mouth and nose. Unless they enter from your mouth and nose, and unless it's something edible, then that doesn't break your fast. And that's why the more correct opinion in regards to eardrops and eye drops of that sort is the same as well, that they also do not break their fast. And so these are some of the acts that we can keep in mind that are commonly known to break the fast. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla, He grant us the ability to perfect our external fast, the fiqh, as well as the internal, inshallah ta'ala. Next week, inshallah, we'll cover the internal aspects, the spirituality of fasting, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Yes, if anyone has any questions, please.